Can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. We're going to go ahead and get started with the budget hearing for Division of Code Enforcement. At the table, we have Councilor Hogan, Councilor Caldwell, Councilor Geathers, Councilor Monto, Councilor Paniagua, President Hudson, Councilor Green, Councilor Majoke, myself, Councilor Allen, and Councilor Schultz. So what we'll do is turn it over to you, Commissioner Collins and Jake, and you guys can kind of walk us through your budget, and then we can open it up for questions.
Morning, councilors. Good to see you again. As we've talked about before, this is the largest division of the Department of Neighborhood and Business Development for code enforcement, where we've got both code enforcement on the traditional enforcement side and permitting. Director DeShaw has got all the information that's in front.
I apologize because I called you Jake. My bad.
I'm going to turn it over shortly to Director DeShaw, but just a reminder of the fact that this work is all in conjunction with not just other departments, divisions within neighborhood and business development, but across the city. And we've been able to be extremely collaborative with the work, and a lot of our successes are not just due to us, but also our co-workers over at Department of Public Works, SPD, Engineering, and we just want to make sure we recognize their work as well.
Thank you. All right, there we go. Good morning. As Commissioner Collins noted, we're quite a large division. We're responsible for a lot of different things, as many of you know. But our work has really been highlighted throughout the pandemic, and especially throughout last fiscal year, directly related to the housing conditions that many of our constituents and citizens have to deal with. Our team is on the front line. I kind of refer to our staff as sort of the unsung heroes of first responders, because I feel like we are, even though we're kind of forgotten about or not really included in that conversation with fire department and police department. I would argue that we're just as essential, and our work and our results have kind of highlighted that, for our city, over this past year. And what this budget does is it kind of allows us to keep building off of that. It allows us to maintain what we have and to build off that, and to continue to strengthen and improve our programs that directly drive and improve quality of life issues that many of you report to me weekly, if not more often than weekly. So happy to just kind of go through this page by page if that seems like that's appropriate.
Can I ask one question before you start going through page by page?
Certainly.
Okay, I'm looking at the rental registry. So we have what actual was 1,600. Do we at some point ever think that we're going to get the rental registry fulfilled all the way to the capacity?
I think we will get really close. It wasn't too long ago somebody was sitting in this chair when we were in the single digits for compliance. That was less than 3 years ago. We are approaching, we're at about 60% compliance, and that's meaningful compliance because that includes interior inspections, which, as many of you know, I think it's kind of moot if we're not getting inside. The whole point of this is to protect renters and the conditions that they're living in, the environment that they're living in. So to take it from 7-8% up to 60% in less than 2 years has shown tremendous growth, and I think the revenue side of it kind of points to that as well. But we're seeing a couple percent increase a month in compliance. So I'm pretty certain and positive that we're going to continue that growth with what we're doing, because not only did we figure out a new system to keep everything cited properly so owners are being held accountable to apply and obtain those, but if they don't, we're using the BA as a tool to find them administratively to get those applications and payments submitted. So all of that has contributed to that increase, and I'm not going to sit here and say I'm satisfied with it. I'm happy with the growth and where we've come from, but I want to get it up into the 90%. I think there'll always be a few that we'll have to chase down, and then new ones that come due again. But that's what we're shooting for by the end of this year.
I appreciate that. So the renewals, you don't have a problem, like, because people know that they have to do the registry, when it comes time to renew it, you don't really have a problem with them?
You mean like getting them to apply again?
Okay, so once they apply for the rental registry, is that their lifetime?
No, it's every 3 years.
So every 3 years, do you have a problem with those same people re-registering on the registry?
Well, that's what I had made mention to. We made some corrections and improvements to what that process entails. So now we're sending out like a notice before you come due, as kind of like a warning, like, hey, a reminder that this is coming up due. But then actually when you expire, you actually get a notice of violation. So that's how we're tracking it in the system. So historically, I would say our good landlords that have been on this for a while, they're going to keep renewing. But there's ones that have not been on the registry that we need to get in line. So we're working hard to get that number up, throughout the rest of the year.
What about if a property changes owner in the process of those 3 years? Do they let you know about this, or do you just find out at the end of the 3 years? Is there some kind of
So rental registries are not transferable. So a new owner, should they choose to keep renting it, is responsible. It can take a little bit of time for that to catch up, because we don't get notified of private transactions, timely. But our system updates based on assessment record. So our ownership, when that's changed and updated, we'll then look at it, and then we have some key indicators to tell us if a property is typically a rental or not. There's some giveaways. Typically, if your billing address, your water billing address, is not that house, it's probably a rental. Or if your tax billing address is not that property, it's probably a rental. If all of that matches, if your ownership is showing that's your assessed address, your owner address, your water billing address, your tax billing address, then that's an indicator typically that it's owner occupied, which would not require the rental registry. So those are the things we look at. Occasionally we have to deal with some upset constituents that may get a letter where we ask them to actually check off that they're owner occupied to then get the exemption, but that's just because it was a rental before. So we're trying to, document that this is in fact no longer a rental. So, that's not often, but that happens every once in a while.
Is there a reason why it is every 3 years, Dave?
I think that's just a good time frame of getting through. There's 9,000 plus or minus rental. So that's a pretty big number to get to more often than that, but it's in line with what the rest of our housing programs are designed at. So if you recall, we changed our legislation locally to do our certificate of compliance inspections every 3 years. We did that, I think, a year or two ago. So that's for our 3-family and up, our bigger mixed use or larger apartment buildings. So it aligns with that, but it also aligns with our lead ordinance, which is key because we're not permanently getting rid of or abating any lead painted surface or subsurface that ever existed in every structure in the city. That would be impossible. What we're doing is reducing lead hazards. So part of the lead program relies on a successful housing programs like the certificate of compliance and the rental registry, because we have to get in every 3 years to see if conditions on painted surfaces are changing. So hazards may reveal themselves as age of housing stock gets older, or additional maintenance may be required. You may be good today, but in 6 years you might have a problem. So all of that is why kind of we're on that timeline or cycle.
The reason I ask is I'm thinking it makes sense to enroll somebody the rental registry once they get into it, that it continue to go until they say otherwise. You know? Yeah, so if I come and register my property, right, and instead of coming in every 3 years to do it, you know, it keep going until I come back to the city to change, or if it change ownership. You know, you see where I'm going with this?
Well, that's not how.
That's why I'm asking. Would that?
Well, say if you registered today and got an inspection and passed, you would have to do that again 3 years from today. We would notify you of that. And if ownership changed, we would notify that new owner. And that's what I was just getting at, that sometimes new owners will move into a rental and, a single family rental and then live there. But we'll ask them to provide documentation that it's no longer a rental, which is them pretty much an affidavit of no, it's owner occupied, and here's my application where I'm exempt, and I'm going to note that it's now owner occupied. So that's how it works. You either have to apply and get the inspection, or you have to apply and get an exemption if we believe you're a rental, or if it's changing hands.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going with this is, how do we make it more of how do we reduce the amount of work from the city side and make it more of like an owner than us constantly sending stuff saying you need, you know what I mean?
Well,
we make it more of a property owner responsibility.
Well, it's always been
The city.
Yeah.
And us constantly sending them.
Well, we have to. Part of the reason why we got down to the single percent is because that wasn't happening. So, we have to do that. We have to put you on notice. If we had good landlords, you wouldn't need me here. Yeah. It's job security, but if we could trust everybody, we wouldn't.
Going with that, but that would be the same thing for me going to motor vehicle and telling them, don't send me a registration every 2 years, I'll call you.
Right, I'll pay.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
But I mean, with rental registry, once it changes, it's somebody would have to. But anyway.
Well, yeah. When a property changes, it's no different than other requirements. The new owner's responsible for everything. They're going to get the trash set out ticket. They're going to get the overgrowth ticket. They're going to anything that we have to cite. We're checking ownership. We're checking water billing. So anytime we're prepared to send out a notice of violation, we're checking ownership, because part of our due process and to make it work legally, if we have to pursue somebody legally, is that we have the right person, the right owner. So we're checking deeds, we're checking water billing, we're checking transactions, and making sure we got the right person on the record to then send any notification to from our office.
So it's mostly through the billing that you flag, changes of ownership and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, so we don't track the sales. If a house could sell yesterday, I don't know about it yet. But at some point that hits our system and it gets changed over, and then we have to, if we have any pending open cases, we have to recite those. So, that's one of the cat and mouse games we see with these LLC outfits, is they'll change it from 123 LLC to 1234 LLC. Technically a new owner. We got to recite everything from the old owner to the new owner, and then kind of not start over, but we have to give them notification and go through the.
One last question. So inspections are every 3 years, as with the registry when you register, right?
Correct.
So, but unfortunately, I mean, we do have the good landlords, but there's also the not so good ones that will just fix things without really fixing them. And then in the process of those 3 years, the renters are going through probably hell in living in these sites. Is it through your office that they can make complaints to how their houses, it's
Certainly.
something goes wrong, or
Tenants can call code enforcement anytime if they have an issue with something. We encourage it. I know people are worried and fear about retaliation, but we can't help if we don't know about it. and it's illegal. We have a good working relationship with Hiscox Legal Aid and the Legal Aid Society to help tenants keep their rights protected when they're battling issues like that, if there are concerns. No one should have to put up with poor housing conditions because they're worried about retaliation. You got to see some of these rent prices that these landlords are getting. It's really amazing, and yeah, so
Is there any way inspections can be a little bit more often than just years out?
If tenant has an issue between that time, they can call us anytime. We're typically a day or a couple days out for an inspection. We have to triage that based on severity of the complaint. Sometimes we can get somebody out right away the day of. But yeah, it's not sit and wait every 3 years. If you have a problem, you can notify us anytime.
So is it through the app? Don't you guys have a new app that you're using?
So we are on the City Line app, See Click Fix, or whatever you want to call it. Complaints can come in that way, but for interior issues inside a unit, we need contact information. So we can't take an anonymous complaint about an inside issue. I mean, we can, but it's hard for us to get access if we don't know who's sending that, how to contact them, how to get inside. So for an interior code enforcement inspection, we actually require that we get a call or an email from somebody that we can actually communicate with and get access from, because we need consent to get inside. So if you're a tenant complaining, we magically can't just break your door down and go in when you're not home. You have to be there, show us what the problem is. We have to go through our inspection, our investigation, determine what's going on.
Question for both of you. Does the housing study will it have an impact on rental registry, knowing that there's more rentals out there that we didn't know about before?
So that's not the intent of the housing study. The intent of the housing study is to determine baseline where our housing stock is, owner-occupied, rental, just our entire housing stock is for right now. And then once we've got that, it's going to be, from there, we'll start working specifically towards identifying what paths we want to take forward to be able to improve the overall condition. But it's not something related to the housing study or related to rental registry would be one of those targeted types of ideas and what we do afterwards with the housing study, and that's not what the intent of this is. That would be the next step in identifying what are the best places to put our energy.
So how do you grow that 60% compliance? Do you know where all the rentals are, or do you feel confident knowing?
Yeah, so we know where our rentals are, and it's part of how we designed our deployment of our housing inspectors. So we used to be deployed in a quadrant similar to our construction pickup schedule. Didn't make sense. Same reason why our SPD is not deployed in that manner. We don't just put same amount of patrol in every quadrant in a city based on construction debris pickup. So we kind of did the same thing, and we've gone through this with I think a good number of you on the council on how we've talked about this. It's been about 2 years now. So we have catchment areas. We have 9 catchment areas or geographic kind of assignments by inspector. And they're different sizes, but they're based on code enforcement activity and rental registries and vacant properties and historical data on number of complaints typically. So for instance, our biggest areas are the people that are up near the university or like Comstock, outer Comstock area. That's our biggest geographic area, where near West Side might be one of the smaller geographic areas. But so we do know where our rentals are, and those assignments and the workload is based on knowing all of that data, along with other information and other things that we're responsible for, because our housing inspectors do much more than just rental registry. They handle every property maintenance complaint citywide. That includes all of our vacants and occupied. So any trash, overgrowth, issues on the outside, tenant complaints, rental registry, vacant property registry, they're doing all that work. We have 14 of them. So we have one full-time person in every area. Then we have our regions. We have a northwest, a south, east and an east. So then we have a floater in every region, then we have a citywide floater. So that's kind of how we're set up. So to answer your question, like I think right now we're in good shape. As we continue to get more data from the housing study, we'll always evaluate if we need to add to that number. But right now I think having 14 housing inspectors is sufficient to cover the number that we project that we believe we have. And moving forward, if that changes, we may be for you next year to ask for additional if needed, but right now we don't feel that's necessary.
How are you doing on Strand Ave? That's my little problem area. How are we doing on Strand House?
So Strand Ave is, there's one property on there that I think may have recently changed hands, that hopefully is, I think one of the vacant ones did. I'll take a look at that. I get past there pretty regularly because you and I have had a similar interest in that particular street. DPW's done a really nice job consistently doing cleanups up there.
They just in and out.
That's the real challenge, right? So it's the combination of when you look at what the code inspectors do. The code inspectors are on the property side, and then DPW has their own inspector for within the right of way. And a lot of what we see within Strand is within the right of way. So it's really a joint effort with our friends over at DPW over there. But definitely continuing to keep them monitoring.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. So where did I leave off? I didn't get very far. Yeah. It's 10:30. We didn't start yet. All right. No, I'll try to make it quick. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions or specifics that we want to get into. But this budget kind of maintains what we have. So it keeps 14 housing inspectors. It keeps 10 building inspectors within code enforcement. It keeps our permit inspectors on the commercial side. So we have 2 electrical inspectors, an HVAC inspector, 2 building inspectors that go out and do all of our commercial inspections for permitting in conjunction with the fire department. It keeps all of our administrative staff in place within codes and permits. We're pretty flat across the board with our office supplies. I mean, most of our expenses are on salaries, and most of our staff is CSEA union or very small amount are paid pursuant. That are management confidential. So all of that is based on the union contracts, which you're all aware of, were approved. Our grass cutting line is pretty flat, but we do a lot of grass mowing throughout the city on vacant lots and vacant houses. So, any of you that hit me up frequently for complaints, know how often, not just you, counselor.
He's not looking at me, but he means me.
But no, I want to point that out because our contractor does a really good job with dealing with some difficult properties. This isn't like going out to cut Bellevue Country Club. Like they're dealing with vacant lots that are, they've got tall grass because we're only getting to them every so often, maybe every 3-4 weeks, and the grass can grow really high in certain areas based on conditions. But there's trash and stuff out everywhere. There's maybe things that damage their equipment. They even have issues sometimes just out doing their normal work. They get things stolen off their truck. So they do a really good job for us, and it's really the back half of our work administratively for citing places. But just wanted to point that out.
Let me ask you this, Jake. I'm looking at the 9100 line, so we're not going to have any reimbursements from any other funds or grants or anything? Because that's zero right out.
Where are you looking?
It's 172. The 9100 line almost.
So
Which one was that?
45.
That's the reimbursement from other funds, right?
Page one.
was that an ARPA? Is that why that's in there? So to be clear, so I think that was in there as, can I see that one more time? I'm sorry.
I think we're going to have to, we'll get back to you on this one, because looking at it right here, it's actually showing a credit of $180,000 since it's in parentheses. So we'll check with our credit team.
I think it was something that we thought was going to be reimbursed, and then we found out that it's not, so the projection is 0.
Got it.
So I can speak to that because I recall what this is. So there were some questions if some of the ARPA funds were going to cover some of our costs, which we put our lead employees and some expenses directly into our budget. They've been built into the budget prior to the pandemic, and we got delayed. So our staff that work in lead directly in code enforcement are on and have always been in the code enforcement budget. There were some questions if that was going to be, if we were going to get some money from ARPA to cover that, but that is not the case because we built that into the budget. We're using the ARPA funds directly for remediation work. We want as much money going into fixing hazards and problems. Now, there are some expenses along the way for training and some equipment and stuff like that, but we want to maximize that dollar line for remediation work because that's what's going to change and improve our problem with lead here. So,
Kind of touched on where I was going, so with that, I'm looking through your budget. Is there anything in here that's going to be for the move? Do you have anything in here for the move?
Not specifically. I think all of our moving costs are covered elsewhere. So individual departments didn't have to plan or budget any of that. So we don't have to worry about. Luckily, I don't have to worry about furniture, IT needs. All that's already set up. With the funding that's being used to move.
So Jake, back to the personnel. Do you have enough staff? And that's a loaded question on my part because I had a conversation yesterday with a real estate broker who said that if she was to look at a property in Salina to give to someone to rent or Syracuse, it is easier for her to go to Salina and say, listen, look at this one. It's going to be faster and more concise. So what's our turnaround time for someone that has to put a wall up in a building before they can rent it or whatever that may be? So do you have enough staff to actually get that done quickly? And what is the turnaround time? If I want to rent a building in Armory Square, but it needs renovations, what's my turnaround time from the moment that I file that application to when I can actually move in there?
Sure. So we've built our objectives and key results around that are 6 weeks for a commercial renovation project. May seem like a long time, but we're well in line with other cities our size. And throwing people at a problem isn't always the solution. So part of our work that we'll be doing the rest of this year is revamping our processes, and that includes moving over to One Park Place. We're finally going to bring everybody that does a review for a permit into that office, where right now we're kind of, even though we went digital, we still had people all throughout the city in different locations working different hours, working different percentages of time on projects. So what we're going to do is every department that reviews permitting is going to have 100% dedication to that process somehow.
That includes the fire department too, Jake?
Yeah, the fire department's coming with us. They can't get away. They're going to be right next to us on the seventh floor.
Monto's point seems like it goes around. We all know how, and it's so much better than it was years ago. But you've taken over permitting, right?
That's
personally?
correct.
So, I mean, I just think that's usually the sticking point sometimes because the fire department chief, the deputy chief, is usually dedicated to other things.
Sure.
So you're going to have you got a civilian person now, right?
We've got multiple civilian people with the fire department. So
right?
the planning and revamping that we're doing is not just for code enforcement, but I'll speak a little bit more broadly. But it includes the fire department has, I believe, at least 3 civilian employees on staff already with one opening. They're coming with us. They'll be sitting right next to us in One Park Place, where we do all of our commercial permitting reviews. On top of that, that's going to include representation for zoning. It's going to include representation for engineering, for water, and for DPW. So everybody that needs to sign off on something will be working 100% of the time on those projects. And we think doing that, moving over to one Park Place together, will give us a system finally that has that truly is centralized. Like, we call it the central permit office, but we haven't really been that ever, not yet.
So does the 6 weeks that you're talking about stay consistent, or do we get in a situation where we're bottlenecked and then you know what I mean? Like, is that an average, or do we have ones that go 6 months?
Well, there's certainly some that take longer, but I think what I would point out to is that the city, there are uncontrollables. That we're pretty good about getting our initial review and our comments out. The back half of that is developers and their designers have to get back to us with revisions. And if that doesn't happen timely, or if there's things that aren't being followed, like perhaps somebody needs something from zoning to then get started and that's not approved, or they haven't filed their stormwater plan and they didn't get started, like, those things take some time to get going, where we can't issue something until that stuff is in and completed. So I'm not trying to dodge your question. It's just a lot more complex than just giving a simple answer, because there's a lot of variables and factors that weigh in on the process. But what I can say is we've made it so much easier and documented the requirements for a commercial permit review than the history of time for the city of Syracuse. And we actually have a document. We can pull it up and say, no, we asked you on April 1st that we needed X, Y, Z from you. And to date, we haven't got that, so that's why you don't have your permit yet. And what I've noticed is there's often the city gets thrown under the bus or blamed for delays when it's really a design professional who's not delivering for their owner or developer that hired them. And I'm not throwing that community under the bus, but it goes both ways. We are only part of it. That community has to be part of the solution too, to improve the process, which we are collaborating with and working on. So. But yeah, our goal is to get every one of those permits reviewed and issued within 6 weeks.
So I'll just jump in a little bit, and I tend to agree with Jake that a lot of times we get stories from developers that, they didn't give me my permit, and then you dig into it and you're like, well, you didn't give them what they asked for, and that's part of what it is. The one thing I do think we should think about as a city is we tend to have you've put the right people in place, but if someone goes on paternity leave or someone goes on a 2-week vacation or someone quits and takes a new job, now we kind of have this bottleneck, that issue. And as we project, hopefully, growth coming in the community in Syracuse, it may be worth building up kind of a reserve of people that would be able to step in, and that if we get a huge number of people trying to build something in the city, to me, that's worth investing, right? Because to Jimmy's point, rightly or wrongly, there is somewhat a perception of the city. I think the city just does a better job of making sure housing's safe compared to some of the suburbs, candidly. I think that's what it is. But to the extent that we have like a robust bench of people ready to review things, I think it's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah. We always appreciate advocacy for additional investment into the work, because it means you believe in the work. And absolutely appreciate the point. I will say there are times in which Jake notices a bottleneck and gets overtime approved, so that can get addressed quickly rather than just having to ride it out. That I think we did that as recently as 6-8 weeks ago. To the point around the fact that we are fully incorporating zoning now, which is brand new, and as Jake mentioned, we're going to have 100% people dedicated from the other departments, and we're moving. One of the things that we've talked about is the fact that we want to fully have the system in place, see how it performs, and be able to come back to you and say, here's specifically where we need something, because we would be hiring for different skill sets, and so we want to make sure that we're hiring for the right skill sets when it's time to be able to do more. We absolutely expect we're going to expand as we see more growth. We've already seen through the pandemic an explosion in the property values, in the permitting values that we've issued, as well as a shortening of time in which we've been able to issue the permits for the new builds. What Jake hasn't touched on yet is where we've A lot of that has come through the redesign of how we do things. We still have a long list, and you may recall from the presentation that Jake did on the entire permitting and licensing process that we have within the department. We're still going through a lot of those and refining the individual processes as well. So people are a significant part of it. We're refining the system first and continuing to refine the system, and we're at one of those points where it's a good place for us to say, okay, we've got a lot in front of us. Let's get this right and then measure again.
Because it is just taking a step back. You know, we have a huge structural budget deficit, and how do you solve that problem? Being the type of place where people say, hey, there's this abandoned or dilapidated building, and Syracuse is going to be a great place to do business for it. So that's, to me, I think it's a key investment for the city.
Yeah, agreed.
Look, we're always looking to build our bench. What I'll say is we're looking to take advantage of some of these structural changes that we're working through, which with legislation before you next session. But with zoning coming on board to the city, those are really zoning plan reviewers. They're processing applications and reviewing plans for compliance with a code. Now, we've always done that with building and fire code, but now the city, we're going to take that on in the same manner for zoning. But what we've never had is our zoning reviewers have never been cross-trained to have the code side of it. So when we hire these new zoning reviewers, I'm going to send them out and get them certified as New York State code officials. So if you walk in and you want to get a fence permit, you can talk to one person. They know what the building code is. They know what the zoning setbacks are and what the zoning law is. They don't need to refer it up to zoning because they are zoning and they're the permit office. Like that's a one-stop shop. Like that's some of the stuff that we're looking to do. But just to point out, later this year we will, between codes and fire, which and zoning, which is what I've referred to as the big three, which most permits have all three on a review. Some only have those three. We will have, I think, 12 plan reviewers. So it's not just code enforcement. Like, it includes much more than just, people say Brian and Gail. I'll say them by name because, they've been here a long time. Like, yeah, those are our two senior plan reviewers within code enforcement, but they don't approve and issue every permit. There's a lot of other people working behind the scenes on this stuff. And to Councilor Green's point, I think we do a very good job on our reviews. And when there's major fires or incidents and a sprinkler system goes off or a fire door works the way it's supposed to, I like to think that's because we did our job and made sure it was on the plans and made sure it got installed on our inspection. Not saying that doesn't happen outside the city, but you are getting a better service and a more quality review when we have the amount of people working on this stuff that we do.
I would just like to know, who are the contracted related parties? Who gets the contracted outside of?
You're looking at 541,700?
Yes.
So Sura, I believe that includes our executive line employees, and then I think it also includes our professional services. So we do have to, we have an elevator engineering firm that does our elevator reviews, since that's very specialized, and we don't have an engineer on staff. I believe that's in that line as well.
Yeah, it's mostly all the employees that sit on the SURA budget that we talked about during the SURA budget hearing.
Okay.
It's specifically those salaries.
Okay.
So, Jake, on page 144, under temporary services, the summer labor, are those underage? Page 14 now.
Underage.
Yeah, so that's where I started my career in code enforcement. I think I was a sophomore in high school. Yeah, it's typically high school, college kids. They're working a summer job, helping cut vacant lots, vacant houses, helping do cleanups, stuff like that.
The $14.20 is not even minimum wage, right? Isn't that $15 minimum wage?
from the city?
Can we pay him?
That might have been a holdover from last year on an error on our part. Mary and Tim, on the personal service detail, page 144 for the temporary services for summer labor, when it,
20 is the minimum wage right now.
okay.
That's just an average for, depending on who you are.
Yeah.
Stay within the dollar figure for the budget.
Yeah, we didn't, I'd have to pull it up. We didn't pay that last year. We paid more than that. So, that included paying more for a driver who has to pull a crew cab and an extended trailer with all the equipment on it.
Yeah, because it statewide is $15, isn't it? I mean, that's what the New York State page says.
14.20.
The statewide $15 minimum wage is enacted as part of the 2016-17 budget.
Yeah,
So
they
it-
inched us up. The New York
Statewide
was
is
15,
not-
we're getting inched up.
I'll just point out, like, we're not paying these at the minimum. We're higher. That's just what's in here. I believe we have, like, the total is like 47 and change, like, so, yeah, we're gonna, yeah.
Council, we're gonna double check that.
Okay.
With the higher ones, okay? So I have one more, because I ride a lot, right? And there are a whole bunch of different garages all over the city. Are those garages legal, illegal? What's with those?
When you say garage, you mean like auto repair?
Uh-huh. They're not really auto repairs, because you see people with chairs sitting in the middle of the floor hanging out. I think that's kind of sort of what happened on Shiner. So how do we?
Okay. I'm familiar with at least a couple that were not being utilized as garages, like you pointed out, that we've shut down. I'm happy to take addresses or areas from you to investigate, but they should be if they're open and operating. But one we dealt with up on Tip Hill near Lewis Park.
Yeah.
And that wasn't legal. We that took a while, but we closed that one down.
That's where they store the ATVs and all that.
Yeah, the one right off of Milton.
Yep.
So yeah, if you have questions over a business or a location that,
I got you.
yeah, you just hit me up. We'll take care of it.
Jake, I was wondering, and maybe the deputy mayor can address this too. I mean, your funding is all from our budget, basically,
That's
outside the ARPA funding that we got.
Yeah, that's correct. We're actually, even with the ARPA funding, we use some of that money for lead training purposes and for equipment, but it's not funding any full-time positions. All of our positions and our spending is right within the city budget, and it's not reimbursed directly. MBD as a whole has reimbursements and payments, but I'll let Michael speak to that.
Well, I was just wondering, there's got to be environmental grants out there that we can access from the federal government of the state, sort of what President Hudson was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew that was where you were going. So there are opportunities for us to write to support what Jake is doing. Absolutely.
Because, actually, Jake, not only, when I work with Jake, not only we're talking the environment, but we're also talking about, like, public safety, too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when the police department doesn't have an issue with, isn't able to, like, use their powers, Jake uses his powers, and it addresses a lot of the problems we have.
That SEPTA application that we submitted to the state was all about the work that Jake does with the police all the time.
EJ's already plugged in with him, Donovan, and all that.
He works
good.
Jake works great with SPD, DPW, every department in the city. He does an amazing job.
And, going back to what you're saying about, if you've been around for a while as far as the permits go, you can, what Michael was saying, and Councilor Green was saying, is that I can almost tell what architect you're having a problem with immediately. You just know that that's it. I would like to see something where, and I don't know if this exists, where we could, like, as a city councilors, we could go into your website and find out what's holding up a certain permit.
Yeah, we have that.
You have that? I
We
don't
have
know how
that.
to- I don't know how to
I
ask.
have a button for that.
But is,
I usually just email you.
but is it public? Can we see that, or you have to do that internally?
So it's public. You have to know what the permit number is, but it's public.
That's a little tricky.
Yeah.
But
Let's work on that.
I mean, it's not a secret. We're not trying to hide where things are. We want to be
No,
transparent.
Just like, you know, I hate to have the, you know, I track you down and you always get back to me, but it, you know, it's just like, what's holding it up, you know?
Sure.
So Councilor, as far as the permit number, you know, our target audience with this is always going to be the developer themselves, and so that's why, you know, when they reach out to us, you know, saying, hey, look, you know, I've talked to my architect and this isn't moving along, we're able to say, well, you actually have access, you can take a look, and if it is us, we own it. If it is your architect, you may want to talk to them and remind them of what's missing, but that because our whole goal is to be as transparent as possible, but the target audience is on that honestly hasn't been the general public. It's been the people that have the business in front of us that are waiting on that final permit issue to be able to start their development, and we want to make sure that everybody involved in that process is able to have access to the information.
Jake, you sure you don't need another plans examiner? How's that work? Does plans examiner 3, do they have to sign off on everything? Is that the last step?
So our plans examiner 3s are 2 more senior building code reviewers. We never had that position, but we're trying to build career pathways within both permitting and code enforcement, so you can come in entry level, either side, and work your way up to something and stay. Because we don't want people to leave. We want them to be able to grow, expand. So we created an additional level, but those 2 reviewers do all the building code reviews on the commercial, the commercial applications. But they're not the only ones on it. That could include fire, DPW, engineering, water department. Like, there's a lot of other.
For the last ones, that they have to sign off on all commercial stuff. And one of those 2, right?
That's correct. I mean, our office ultimately ends up issuing the permit in the end once all those approvals are met.
So, Jake, what's, as I think here, is the uniform like the yellow vest and stuff like that, or what's the uniform?
Yes, that was part of CSEA negotiations. We don't have like a traditional uniform like a fireman or police officer, but our inspectors do have to go into some, you know, not so desirable conditions. So it's some money that was part of CSEA negotiations to allow them to purchase uniforms or clothing that's appropriate for the work that they do, even though we don't have like a specific required uniform.
Okay.
But we do have like safety vests and things of that nature that everybody has.
Where we come from that?
No. This is paid to the employees directly per contract.
So I'm going to jump back onto another side of town, right? Code enforcement. You know where that storage facility is on Kirkpatrick?
By Parks and Rec?
Yep, and you know how I complained about that couch being out there for 400 years, right? I'm wondering if there's a way, because I'm starting to figure out where it's coming from. It's those people from that storage, and they dump that stuff out and they take it across the street, and it looks like crap over there. So I'm just curious, is there any way that they should have cameras to see who's dumping, right?
Absolutely. Sounds like a Sergeant Romaine special. No, we can look into that. I'm not joking about it. Like, we've done really good things with looking at, you know, finding evidence of who's doing what and getting things taken care of. But we'll look into that.
'Cause it's all furniture and it's a storage facility. So when they move out, they don't want it. They take it across the street. They dump it.
Yeah, and if not, maybe it's a location we can get camera installed. So we'll look into that.
So, Jake, Sergeant Romaine is our only ordinance person. Do we have another officer besides that?
So
That's not your, I mean, you guys work with them, but.
yeah, we work with a lot of personnel from the police department. It kind of depends on what the issue is, but I'm in communication with all the chiefs weekly on different matters, captains, area sergeants, lieutenants on different things. So even though he may be designated as like the go-to ordinance person, like SPD fully supports our work because I think they see the return that they're getting on us helping with matters that maybe they can't get everything done on. But on top of that, we're looking to bring in some special police officers into the division directly to help support some of the work that we're doing that Carlos can't get to on a daily basis.
That would be terrific.
So
Carlos.
another EJ or two or
And the same thing with Sam Perry over at DPW. I know you work with them too quite a bit, but they do an amazing job in our neighborhoods. I wish we had more of them though.
I think he's advocating for you, more people.
I think you are. You're doing a very good job.
Well, listen, I mean, we've come a long way, but there's still a lot of improvements we can make. And I'm always looking at process and performance first before we throw more people into it. Not that, that isn't always an answer, but it may come to that, but we have a lot of other things that we're trying to improve on before that.
So similar to Councilor Hogan's question about finding out where we are with any given permit, do we have a way to go in and see where, even by district, what codes activity has happened? Or is it just search by property? I know IPS, but that was only part of the story. So how do we get the full story without asking you daily like I do?
Well, that you can still do the parcel search for on IPS. So you have to know what property you're looking up, and it'll give you a rundown of what it is. The where's my permit function is what I was speaking to earlier, which if you know what the permit number is, you can look that up, and it gives you every status, every pending status from every reviewer. If there's comments already, the comments are there. So all of that is available, and shout out to our API team for putting that together.
So address specific, not region or district specific.
Yeah, I mean, right now I don't believe there's a way to kind of pull up a district for kind of generic information on that.
Yeah, so our data team, so there's a person on the codes budget for data and a person on the MBD budget for data that work together under Director Rose Tardif, and they are consistently responding to requests internally from us on, hey, we need to look at something specific that the system won't necessarily put automatically issue a report on, and so they go in through the back end and they pull that data for us. So we completed one yesterday on a certain property that we wanted to look at, which was an easy way for us to go in and do it, but we've also looked at it based on a series of properties based on ownership. If we're able to not have a ton of different ownership names, LLC names, but we know what those names are. We can do it by region. It's a bit of work on the back end because of the fact that the database is a dated database.
Jake, if everything's in order, how quick do we turn around simple residential things like fences, sheds? If I walk in and everything's in order, how quick do I get that permit?
That should be on the spot. I will note we've been without our residential plan reviewer. We have 2 openings right now we're looking to fill quickly. Actually, I have an interview this week for one of them, so I'm hoping. But yeah, those things for our weekend warriors, for our owner-occupied places, you want to come in, put a fence in, do a pool, put a deck on. If you have your survey, your documentation, you should be in and out in 15, 20 minutes.
And Jake, one other thing, since it affects us district councilors quite a bit, is encroachments. They stop coming up to us. We need to have them, just so we know what's going on too,
Sure. So I believe we've straightened that out. So
okay. I
mean, we in general though, we don't get a lot of encroachments throughout the calendar year. So I think since it was brought up, any new ones should then be coming before you. So
thank you.
In that time frame, we might not have had any. So
okay, thank you.
What about new small businesses? The turnaround of the permits for signs, to put up their signs and change of occupancy, stuff of that kind. They submit at with the clerk. How do they do this?
So it's within that time frame that I mentioned to Councilor Monto.
6 weeks.
Yeah, but so we have an intake process where you kind of come in, you bring in your documentation, your plans, walk us through what you're doing, and it's kind of like a completeness check. That's where we kind of verify, do you have everything you need to actually start the official review? But prior to that, we can do pre-development meetings, and they don't have to be like these large, citywide like every city department's represented. They can be smaller where it's just a few of us. Maybe it's just zoning, fire, and codes meeting with somebody kind of walking through the process. So we try to do that as much as possible when people need guidance or help along the way. Some choose not to use those services and just submit because they've done it before, or they have somebody that's submitting their application and they've done it before, so they don't take advantage of that.
Do the drawing and the actual form that you have.
Yep. So we have a registration process to register the project with the city as a whole, and then from there it goes through the intake or completeness check, and then if they have everything, it goes into review. That's for commercial projects.
And that's the 6 weeks.
Correct. For a commercial renovation. Yep.
You guys finished with
the only thing I want to do is just take a quick moment to recognize the incredible amount of work over the last few years between the codes team and the law team that led to the court win related to all the green properties. That is a 1,300-page filing in court that really needs to be recognized for the amount of work that's gone into that across both those teams. Just wanted to say that.
Commissioner, that was, that took up a significant amount of resources from both codes and law department. It's amazing that you're both able on track to keep the regular jobs going, and that was a really significant step. Thank you very much.
And SPD as well. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, SPD has been a critical partner on that and keeping people safe.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. What's next?